So I've never done kind of a webinar in this way where I have had no contact with the people on the other end. I will say I did radio for 5 years. And so that's kind of similar to this because you sit in a room and you talk to yourself the whole time. And I totally agree, Laura. You sit in a room and you talk to yourself the whole time. So I am used to talking to myself, but this is a little bit different than my current norm. So we'll give everyone just a few more minutes to pop in. I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we're doing today. This is week 1 of treating yourself well. And I am super excited about these 4 weeks. I often, when I work with clients, even when I work with other counselors and we do Q&A and things like that, we jump right into the deep stuff. Like you come in with crisis and you come in with, this is what's going on. What do I do? How can I manage it? And so we jump right to the deep stuff and we miss some of these basics that we're going to be talking about for the next 4 weeks. And because sometimes when someone's on a healing journey, it's just one thing after another, and it feels like there's no time to just sit and talk about some of these basic things that truthfully, 1, they help you survive the healing journey. And then 2, they actually help it progress a little bit quicker. And so they're really vital. And so I'm very thankful for those of you that are able to join and get some of these basics and be able to work a little bit better with yourself. As I put in the intro to the class, while most of our information is targeted towards people who are dissociative, so people who have a trauma coping system or who have DID, dissociative identity disorder, either one of those, the information is applicable to everyone, because even if you're whole, there's so much that we can get from being self-aware. I'm sure we all know that person who lacks self-awareness and they say and do things that can be surprising, we'll just say. And so self-awareness, which is a lot of what we're going to be covering, and learning how to meet your own needs, those are vital, vital skills for absolutely any person. So I'm excited you guys are joining. We have a full group today. So I'm just going to check the list here and make sure there's nobody hanging out there, and then we will pray and we will jump in. So we will do, since it looks like chatting is working, we will do Q&A kind of at the end. So if you have questions, I encourage you to write them down. Don't necessarily type them and send them as you have them, because then I'll have messages popping up as I'm talking. But save them till the end, and in the last 10 or 15 minutes, we'll go through and do some Q&A. All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today. Thank you for this time, and thank you for just each and every person that has logged in today to learn and to grow themselves. I think we can all learn and grow from this, and also the people that they care for and work with. I ask, Father, that as we just go through this material today, that your presence would be at the center of all that we say and do. Take authority over everything that's not of you, and I bind it in Jesus' name. And I ask that you prohibit Satan from seeing, hearing, or interacting with this time in any way. I trust you, and I am excited for the healing and the growth that will happen from today's information. Let's give you full authority here, God, in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so after our time today, I will email a link out to this little booklet right here. Internal Communication When Dissociated. This is a free booklet that is available on our Trauma Coping System website, or I'm sorry, wrong website, Trauma Healing Center website. And you can download it, and we're going to cover a lot of the material in this book today. It's interesting when you say the word internal communication, the different things that come to mind. We all do internal communication. Internal communication, I see why people have someone help them. Goodness. Internal communication is thinking. Internal communication is just kind of being in your own headspace. And we all have headspace, and sometimes it's busier than others for sure. Sometimes we get stonewalled by our own headspace. We all have headspace. So when I talk about internal communication, if that phrase feels intimidating to you, or if it feels, yeah, I've tried that, it doesn't work for me. God wired us to think. And that's all that internal communication is. So I want to give you that place to start when you think about this topic today. When you are dissociated and when you're on a healing journey from dissociation, being aware of what's going on in your own thoughts, your own mind, is vitally important. There are so many clues to your day-to-day life that you get all the time. The thing with dissociation is it's a coping mechanism that is meant to shut down a lot of that internal awareness. And the reason is because if you are in trauma, if you grow up in trauma, you can't be getting alarms in your brain all the time and still function and grow as a kid. So God designed dissociation to shut down and make you less aware. Sometimes we call that denial, less aware of what's going on internally so that you can focus on the day-to-day. So that's great when you're in trauma, and especially when you're growing and developing. But there comes a point when you get in adulthood and hopefully you're out of trauma that you need to start paying attention to what's going on internally. There's a lot that can happen when you don't. One of the things that's probably the most common that I hear is overwhelming or intense emotions, but not knowing what it's connected to. Like this situation happened and oh my gosh, my anxiety went through the roof, or I just got so depressed, like I couldn't even move for 2 days, or my fear just completely overtook me. And as we talk about it, it's like the situation doesn't necessarily merit the amount of emotional response. So there's a disconnect and there's a little bit of confusion. One of the statistics I heard is kind of startling when you think about it. And it's when someone is dissociated, when they have a trauma coping system and a situation happens and they have an emotional response to it. On average, that person, 80% of what you're feeling in that moment is not connected to what's happening in that moment. It's connected to past trauma. 80%. That's very, very big. If you're not connected internally, if you're not listening to your own thoughts and your own heart, you have no idea what that 80% is. You have no idea what, why you're responding so big. Yeah, the comment was hurtful. Yeah, that person shouldn't have said or done what they did. But it's like, and then I hear this too. I look at other people and they don't respond that way. I don't understand why I'm responding that way. 80% of that internal response is likely connected to past trauma and pain. When you have good internal awareness, you're able to identify what that 80% is. Not often right away, because that is the mechanism of dissociation, is that detachment. But when you practice internal connection and internal communication, as you practice that, then when something happens and something rises up in you, you already have a pathway in your brain to connect back to what's going on and to see where it might be that you need to work and where it is that you might need to heal. So that is why this is so important. As we go through the next 3 weeks after today, we're going to build on this and we're going to talk about, okay, so now I have internal communication. What in the world do I do with it? Because it's kind of scary and overwhelming for some, not for everyone. But today we're just going to focus on that internal communication piece. We're going to start with, well, we kind of went through the why is it important? Ways to communicate internally. And actually, I'm going to skip ahead in the book a little bit, and I'm going to talk about obstacles to internal communication, because that is usually where we hit first. Like I said, I commonly hear, oh, I've tried that. that doesn't work for me. Or I've done that and it completely overwhelms me and I can't function. Or um, sometimes people even say, yeah, I'm done with all of that. Like that's the past. And I can't afford to continue to spend time and energy on that. All of those responses are completely understandable. Dissociation is a response to overwhelm. And so it makes sense that when you start undissociating, I don't think that's actually a word, but we'll use it for the moment, that it's overwhelming because there's a lot of information there that your brain shut down for a certain reason. But what I will tell you is the brain, God is amazing with how he wired us. And very often we can't begin undissociating until we have some skills built and until there's some capacity. And so you can do more than you think you can. It's just sometimes is a little bit scary. And so what I would recommend to you, first of all, is if you've done it before and it didn't work for you, those are the obstacles we're going to talk about. If you've done it before and you're kind of over it and you're like, it's just too much, it's not worth my time, then I just encourage you to listen today and maybe you'll find some value in trying again because it is valuable. But first, let's focus on and if you've done it before and it doesn't work. I don't know if that was the first one I said. That's the big place I want to focus. Couple different things that often happen when you first try internal communication. One is you hear nothing. Like you may feel like your thoughts are racing and going constantly all day long. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to try this internal communication thing. So you sit down and you get your notebook and you're like, okay, and your pen. I don't think I have a pen here. And you're like, let's try this internal communication thing. Nothing. Nothing. Okay. I don't even have anything to write. That was great. And you move on. That is frustrating. That's definitely frustrating. Very often, why that happens is because when you're ready for that moment to listen, you have parts internally that kind of freak out a little bit because while they've been talking to you your whole life and communicating your whole life, now that you've actually turned and paid attention to them, they're like, she's looking. I kind of think of the little kids that are like getting into something maybe in the kitchen or they're playing in their bedroom, super secret spy game or something. And mom walks in and they're all like, oh, I'm not doing anything. That kind of thing. That's kind of what your parts do when suddenly you want to turn your focus and your attention to them. It can be kind of intimidating for them as well as it is intimidating for you. And in that case, I encourage you to keep trying. I'm going to talk you through 4 steps on how to keep trying in a few minutes. But I encourage you to keep trying and set aside those times. And if you sit there for 2 or 3 minutes and your brain just is truly blank with nothing, that's fine. Make a note of it. Still journal that at least and say this, the date and the time, and my mind was just really quiet. And then you end that time by telling yourself, I get it. This is new. This is scary, but I'm going to keep trying because every part of me is important. Every part of you, all of us, however you want to phrase it, is important. See you again tomorrow or see you again next week, however you set your frequency. Be consistent because what you're doing with this internal communication is you're building trust. And trust is necessary for the healing process. It just is. And so you have to be patient with yourself and you have to take your time. Now, if you have tried it and you're like, wow, when I start to listen, I am completely overwhelmed. There is so much information. I don't even know what to write down. And maybe even you black out when you start to listen to yourself and you come to 15, 20 minutes later, a couple hours later, and you don't even know like where you are, what was going on. That's just overwhelm is what that is. When you get overwhelmed, your system is just designed to kind of shut down and shut you down, shut down whatever part of you is overwhelmed. And in that case, also just being consistent is helpful. But also some of these other tools that we're going to talk about that may give you a slower path into internal communication, but also a bit of a safer path, and one that will allow you to really connect with your heart and your mind in a way that is safe for all of you, because that safety is just really, really important. We cannot possibly undersell it. Let's see, I think there's one more I'm missing here. Oh yeah, let's talk about these 3 words because this is kind of important. There is, when it comes to those moments of listening internally and finding that silence, that, or even sometimes this can be behind aggression too, when you listen internally and what you hear is kind of aggressive. Very often that's because your system is very resistant to your involvement. And I know that may sound crazy because you're like, this is me. So my involvement with myself, how can I be resistant in my involvement with myself? Well, this is dissociation. If you've been on this journey very long, that actually doesn't sound too strange to you. But if you're new to this journey, or if you're new working with people who are dissociated, that may just be like, I need a minute to wrap my brain around that. And that's okay. So dissociation, when you have all these different parts, you have primary who feels most like you, and then you have all of these other parts. When the trauma happened as a child, that primary was tucked away to be safe, and all of these parts handled the trauma and handled all the big and scary things. So if you're now a 30-year-old adult or 40 or 50-year-old adult, your system has been handling your life for many, many, many years. And they really don't trust or believe that the primary is equipped to do it. Because when hard things come, that's kind of the first thing that goes, is the primary gets tucked away and everyone else handles it. And so there's some resistance to you suddenly wanting to be involved in the process. You have to be really patient with that, because these parts, every other part of you, they have worked so hard. They've literally given their life to protecting you, to helping you cope and survive. And there's so much respect that is earned through that process. And that's why that trust building is really, really important. The other reason why sometimes internally everything will shut down when you try to listen is that fun word, denial. Denial is the foundation of dissociation. The purpose of disconnecting internally is denial. It is so that this bad thing is happening and it's too overwhelming for me to think of it. So I'm going to dissociate and I'm going to deny, I'm going to ignore that this bad thing is happening. So this would be the primary in that case. And then this would be the parts that are handling the trauma. That denial is what keeps you surviving as a child, mentally and sometimes physically. But as an adult, it's what keeps you disconnected from your full self. And so when you start to get involved with yourself again, that denial can really kick in strong and make it where what parts? There's no parts. You're crazy. Who has parts? Nothing bad happened to you. There's nothing to see here, nothing to see. That's how that denial plays out internally. And sometimes what you will hear when you are quiet is those parts talking and telling you we're not here. And they may even say that we are not here. Because that denial wants to keep you disconnected from the bad things, because your system believes this will be too overwhelming for you. Often your system doesn't know you're a grown-up now. They don't know that you're safe, and they don't know that you have skills and support to handle it. So that denial can kick in and make internal communication hard. Sometimes you don't want to know. truthfully. It's hard. You come to counseling or you talk to your prayer person or your spouse or your friend, whoever's supporting you, and you're like, I just want to know, I just want to know what happened to me, or I just want to know what I believe that needs to be healed. I just want to move forward. And truthfully, you do. But then when it comes to that moment, it's like, oh, scary, scary. Well, your system can sense that fear in you in that moment. There's no way to hide it from them. They are part of you, so they sense it. And they're like, are you kidding me? You're scared to death. We're not letting you in here. We're not. And so that's, again, where that building trust and that working through things internally is just vitally important. And then the other reason, and it's kind of paired with these first two, that can make your system shut down when you try to listen is overwhelm. Remember, the trauma happened and you were overwhelmed by the trauma. The overwhelm is what made your brain, by God's design, your brain decided, okay, we got to disconnect. We got to handle the trauma. This part has to know nothing of it. The overwhelm initiates the denial, or it actually initiates the dissociation, which creates the denial that says nothing is happening. So that overwhelm is the very, very start of it. And so when you start to go internally and those memories start to come up and those thoughts and those beliefs, it can create some emotional overwhelm. And your brain is wired to shut down in overwhelm. That is one of those core features of dissociation. And so when you try to listen and nothing happens, or everything happens, that's why you kind of shut down. And often that's why people quit trying, because it was just too overwhelming. And that's when you have to kind of back up and take it a little bit slower. So let's talk about 4 ways, kind of not 4 ways, but a 4-step process in starting out on internal communication. Now, if you've never done internal communication before, remember, this is just listening to your own thoughts. Every person has thoughts. God made us that way. This is becoming aware of them and listening to them. If you've never done that before, this will work for you. If you're a pro at it, this may still be helpful for you. And if you somewhere in between, then maybe this will just give you some structure to be able to go a little bit deeper into doing some internal communication. And again, all of this information is in the booklet that I will send you to online so that you can download that and have it for yourself between now and next week. Okay, so step 1, this should not surprise anyone listening. If you've been listening, listen to your own thoughts. It is amazing how much we don't listen to our own thoughts. But your brain is thinking all day long. You're thinking, I need to pick up these groceries. You're thinking, I need to schedule this meeting. You're thinking, man, I really wish I was on vacation. You're thinking all kinds of things all day long. The tendency is to kind of block that out as background noise to your life. So kind of like this bookshelf behind me. I'm sure some of you have noticed it. I have some gaps over here, but you're probably not super focused on it. Maybe if you're trying, some people, book nerds like my in-laws, my family that I married into, would be looking to see what the titles are back here. But most of you are probably focused on what I'm saying. Probably many of you have dissociated during this talk already. If you dissociate too much and you're overwhelmed, feel free to jump out of the meeting. That won't disrupt anything here, but I want you to be safe on your end. We have to pay attention to what's going on in the background of our day. We have to, like we're looking at the books to see what the titles are. That's what we need to do with our own thoughts. What am I thinking about? Like at any moment, what am I thinking about right now? What am I thinking about? It can be very, very useful skill for any person for that level of self-awareness. And sometimes you can discover things about yourself quite often that you did not know you were feeling or thinking. So start just by becoming more aware of what your thoughts are. Then write it down. So the thing with dissociation is it's an internal disconnect. So you could maybe be driving and be like, okay, now's a good I'm not doing anything else. I might as well try that awareness and listen to my own thoughts. So you take a moment and you listen, and you're like, oh, wow, what? I did not know I was worried about that. That's interesting. You get home and you have no memory of it. You don't remember, maybe you remember listening, but you don't remember what you heard. Maybe you don't even remember trying to listen. It's as if it never happened. That is normal with dissociation. Remember, dissociation is that internal disconnect, often due to overwhelm and just the drive, that need to deny, to not acknowledge something. Write it down. So probably shouldn't do that while you're driving. But you can do that at some other point in time. I encourage you to have a notebook of some kind. Have something that you can write in. Your parts internally will know, okay, this is my book. I can take notes in this book. And they may leave you notes, which I think we'll talk about here because I don't think we're going to talk about that later. That can be unsettling. So if you have a journal and you do write in it, you may find, depending on just how your dissociative system works, that you flip through that journal sometimes and you find things you've written that you don't remember writing. And that can definitely be a little bit unsettling and can create some of that overwhelm that we talked about, which leads to denial. I can't, what? Shut down. Loss of memory. That's kind of how that process works. Just kind of have to take a deep breath. And the first place I would go to, if you can, is just feeling some gratitude that some parts of you felt safe enough to write something in the book, because that's a big step towards that internal communication and a big step towards being able to listen to your own thoughts. Then respond, write a note back. Sometimes when you try to listen intentionally and there's nothing, or there's overwhelm, a better way to do that is to communicate on paper and to be able to even write notes back and forth, which is completely fine. Often that feels safer for many parts of your system. It may even feel safer for you. And that still completely counts as internal communication. It's just kind of a way to ease into it. So write down your thoughts when you can. The third step is acknowledge your needs. So once you start to listen internally, what you're going to find is that there are needs that you have. There are things that are important to you, to some part of you, but remember, all your parts are you. There is something that's important to you, and you need to pay attention to that. It may seem ridiculous. It may seem impossible. Just because you acknowledge that there's a need there doesn't necessarily mean you do something, you give yourself exactly what you need, because the need may be something that's harmful or just not practical. Maybe the need is, I have to quit my job. Like, that's what I hear every time I do internal dialogue, is I hate my job. I have to quit it. It's too much. I don't feel safe there. Most of us can't just quit our job. That's kind of an essential part of life. In step 4, we're going to talk about what to do with that type of need. But first, you need to acknowledge what those needs are. The needs that you should look for, they are almost always going to fall in one of these two categories: comfort or safety. Comfort or safety. Comfort because pain, dissociation, trauma, memories, emotional overwhelm, all of that creates a level of pain internally. And so whenever we experience pain on any level, we have a need for comfort. One of the things that can be very off-putting to people is when they discover that internal need for comfort, and the comfort that is wanted is either unhealthy or it doesn't match their chronological age. We've been on this journey for a while, you know what I mean, but I'm going to talk about that one first. Because typically when you have a trauma coping system, you dissociate it as a child in trauma, many of your internal parts are probably still at that level of maturity and that level of development. And so your need for comfort may be a stuffed animal. Your need for comfort may be, I want to color. I need crayons so I can color. Your need for comfort may be, I just want mommy to hold me. I just want to be held. There's a lot of needs for comfort that have been shelved in your system because they couldn't really be met when you were a child. And as an adult, when you look back at that, you can be like, wait, what? Like, I can't carry a stuffed animal around? Yeah. You can leave it in your car, keep it in your purse, definitely have it in your home. That is a source of comfort, and that is helping yourself. Next week, we're talking all about comfort. So I'm going to kind of cut that off a little bit. I almost got too far down that path, and we'll pick that up in more detail next week. Very, very important to comfort yourself.